Hello, everyone, and welcome to CSA's webinar series, CSA Cloud Bytes. Today's webinar is titled The Underrated Link Between Malicious Code and Cloud Security. Just a few housekeeping items before we do get started. During this presentation, you have the opportunity to submit questions at any time. There is an Ask the Question tab that's at the bottom of your screen. We'll reserve time towards the end of the webcast to address any questions. Additionally, the slides from this webinar are not going to be provided. Again, we will not be providing slides. However, you can access a recording of this webinar anytime. Just use the same link to view the webinar again. Today, I'm really excited to have with me Itai Tevet, who is the CEO of Intezer. Previously, he served as the head of Israeli Defense Forces Cyber Incident Response Team, combining technical expertise and leadership experience to mitigate nation-state-sponsored cybersecurity threats. During this time, Itai led an elite group of cybersecurity professionals in incident response, digital forensics, malware analysis, and reverse engineering. So we're really excited to have Itai with us. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us. And without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to our presenter.
Thank you so much. So very excited to present here the webinar. And just as Hillary mentioned before, I really come from the world of incident response, quite transitioned lately to the world of cloud security, but anything related to understanding code, understanding cyber threats is what I've been doing in the past, 10 years or so. So I'm very excited to present this very interesting topic, which is the link between cloud security and malicious code, and all about runtime security. So we're going to have a very straightforward agenda for today. First of all, I'm just briefly going to walk over what are the challenges in securing cloud infrastructure as a service. Then we're going to talk about the differences between pre-runtime checks and checking your code before deploying into production versus monitoring what's happening in runtime. Then we're going to talk about the solution for runtime protection, which is cloud workload protection platform. And lastly, I'm going to present a new approach for how to empower cloud workload protection platforms with a new type of technology that can help make it even better. In the end, we'll have some time for questions, so feel free to just type them in our chat room. So I'm not sure how many of you have heard about me or my company, but we're mostly well known for our research and publications of undetected threats. We usually do that every week or so. And 2019 was actually a very interesting year for us because more than 80% of the undetected threats we have published about were focused on Linux servers, which is quite a change between the year before, which was frankly quite the opposite. But really, there is a very big increase that we see in the wild of attackers trying to attack cloud infrastructure and Linux servers in particular. And I'm sure it's not a big surprise to all of you. I mean, most organizations are now doing this transition to the cloud, and it just makes sense that also threat actors have, let's say, increase their appetite towards the same areas. And I wanted also to show there is a recent survey that was conducted that also confirms this need for having Linux, some kind of like Linux server protection, right? So 85% of this survey's participants said that they think that endpoint security for Linux servers is quite necessary. However, I'm sure that if I'll ask an open question of how many of you have actually installed an AV or an endpoint protection on their Linux servers, on their production environment, I'm sure the numbers would be very, very different. And also we see that in a different survey showing that although the need is quite clear for protecting your Linux servers and your cloud infrastructure as a service, only 24% apply a runtime security solution for their cloud. And honestly, I think this number in reality is even lower because nobody really wants to install a regular like AV in their production environment. That just doesn't happen. And the reason why, I talked with quite a lot of people in the past 2 years about this issue, and they quite told me the same thing. I would divide it to three really main things that I heard. One is, hey, we already have a bunch of false positives and noise in our security team yet today, so I don't want to install yet another security solution that will produce more false positives, right? This is the first reason that I heard. The second one is even more concerning, which is most people that I talk to just don't really believe that they will stop real threats in their Linux servers using a traditional like AV or endpoint security. And actually, there's a very interesting experiment that was conducted by a research group called Team Kimru. If you know them, they're very good cyber researchers, and they did a very interesting experiment. They took 9,000 known malware samples, and only, and 78% of them were completely undetected by the top 30 antivirus products. This is just crazy. This is really quite a horrible statistic. And think about it. The 9,000 samples are known malware. These are known to be malicious. What about all the unknown threats that are out there to Linux environments? I'm sure that the result would be even worse. And the most prominent or emphasized reason of not deploying a runtime protection today was performance. Hands down, everybody told me, hey, there's no way that I'm going to slow down my production environment because of some AV, right? That's something that was really repeated across every person that I've been talking to. And under performance, I also talked about, the general fit to modern infrastructure, right? That includes containers, speed, scale, servers going up and down. Traditional runtime protection solutions just don't really fit into that modern infrastructure. By the way, for those of you who are familiar with Kubernetes and Docker and are wondering what kind of framework the snail is, so just so you know, they just typed slow performance in Google image search, and that's what it came up with. So you're all good. There's no new framework you should know about. So anyway, really false positive, the efficacy and performance degradation is the top three reasons that I heard of not wanting to install any kind of Linux protection on the servers in runtime, although there's a very big need of it. So because of this fact that in one hand, nobody wants to install a traditional endpoint protection on their servers, and in one hand, there's a very big threat, that leads to a gap that needs to be somehow bridged. And how usually organizations approach that is they say, hey, instead of focusing on runtime protection, we're going to focus on the pre-runtime scans, right? To make sure that all the code before that I deploy it into production is secure, is not vulnerable, and so on and so forth. That way, it won't affect my performance. It won't affect any of the other concerns that I have, but I'll make sure that I'm secure before deploying the code into production. Now, this type of approach is, well, it's very important to check for your code before you deploy it into production. Make sure you don't have any big fat CVEs that are known to attackers, it's quite a good way to approach it. However, the situation today where everybody focuses on the CI/CD process and vulnerability scanning results in a very, very big problem, which is people don't really know what's happening in runtime. I have a chat with quite a lot of CISOs last year, and they all told me basically the same thing. They told me, hey, we have tens, hundreds, or even thousands of cloud servers in our, VMs in Azure or EC2s in AWS, and I have no idea what's actually going on in runtime. I don't know what programs are running, what code is running at any given moment. So this is a very big issue, to be blind into where actually the action is happening, right? Where actually attacks can occur. Now, this is a big one, folks. Think about it. Any type of attack that someone wants to conduct, it always translates to some code in runtime, right? So let me give you an example. If an attacker wants to move laterally across your network, if they want to steal information, scrape for credentials, whatever attack vector they want to conduct, in the end, they have to run code. They have to run some kind of commands or code in your system, right? So looking at the runtime, not looking at the runtime, not knowing what programs are now running in your system really keeps us quite blind to the important piece of cybersecurity, really. So the solution for that, for this gap of, hey, I do need to have some kind of runtime protection, and on the other hand, I don't want to suffer from performance degradation, false positives, and so on and so forth, is quite a new market category that was accumulated by Gartner called Cloud Workload Protection Platform. Essentially, this is it is defined quite as the endpoint protection platform just for cloud native and modern infrastructure, right? So what you know that you have been installing in a regular endpoint, the same concept, but now designed for an infrastructure that includes containers, speed, scale, and so on and so forth. So my first 2 cents of this webinar would be really, first of all, don't compromise only on pre-runtime scans, because then you might be missing real attacks going on in your system. And secondly, is really a recommendation to research this category of cloud workload protection platform, because it's most likely what you are looking for. Now, I do want to provide a few tips before you research this category to make sure you are aware of several maybe faults or disadvantages of some solutions that are included on the category. So first, I would be aware of what I call migrated endpoint security, meaning there are several solutions who are basically like the traditional endpoint security, but just marketed as cloud native. And just be aware of that, because you don't want to face the same concerns that you have as from regular AVs. And secondly, another pitfall would be to have a cloud workload protection platform that is only focused on containers. So there are a lot of things that are running code, right, in your cloud infrastructure as a service. It could be really the VMs, the EC2s, also containers, obviously. And you want to protect in runtime everything that runs code, not necessarily only containers. So that's something additional that you want to be aware of. And the third point is something that I'm going to elaborate soon. So I'll just skip that for now. But really to summarize, the first part of my presentation is, hey, first of all, every single attack in the end always translates to code in runtime. So you better, like we all as an industry, we gotta pay more attention to the programs and the code that are running in runtime and not only conduct pre-runtime checks. And lastly, really, the beginning of this solution is really to research for a cloud workload protection platform that you like, that you find suitable to your needs. Now, my next part, I wanted to present a new type of approach that can empower cloud workload protection, take maybe the runtime security approach to the next level. And this approach I call code reuse analysis. And I'm very excited to show it to you here because I think you'll find it very compelling and quite, well, it can solve quite a lot of the disadvantages that today cloud workload protection solutions might have. So as I mentioned before, cloud workload protection is definitely the place that you want to go if you want to conduct runtime protection for your cloud infrastructure. However, they have a few disadvantages that I just mentioned before, but I think the biggest one, or well, something that really that is common across all these solutions, is that their main strategy is to detect malicious activity and malicious code by searching for anomalies, right? So trying to figure out if something is off the line, if something is suspicious, any kind of suspicious behavior triggers an alert. And that approach, that strategy of focusing on anomaly detection usually tends to generate quite a lot of noise to security teams. And I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. I mean, anomaly detection tends really to generate quite a lot of false positives. And also, you know, that's just a side note. If an attacker, you would want to fool these systems, basically, you just need to appear normal, right? You need to just make sure your activity is not too much off the hook. But really, the noise that is generated among what would be a legitimate activity that is just slightly suspicious might overwhelm a lot of the security teams that are on the line today. However, Gartner, in their report about cloud workload protection platforms, actually predict that organization will take a different strategy rather than anomaly detection. A different strategy that is much more like a whitelisting approach or immutability in their servers and not search for suspicious behaviors. And think about it, it makes sense because most of the code and most of the activity that is going on in your cloud workloads is quite predictable, right? It's not like a regular endpoint or a laptop that people can do whatever they want. Usually in your servers, in your cloud infrastructure servers, you quite know what should be running there. And you just need to make sure that every single program is code that you're already familiar with and nothing that is unauthorized or malicious. So this whitelisting approach is what they call their core, their main recommendation for the core security strategy for cloud workload protection. However, there's a reason why most cloud workload protection solutions today don't take this approach of whitelisting or application control. Now, why is that? Well, the way that I see it is it's quite hard technologically, like it's a very big technological issue. How do you make sense of all the binary code running in your entire cloud infrastructure? This is quite a big technological challenge. And because it's very hard to control all the code that is running in memory across a fleet of might be even 1,000 servers, it's very, they tend to just compromise on, let's just look for the symptoms or the suspicious activity that is generated from the code that is running in runtime. Sorry for the a bit hard explanation, but in the end, what I'm trying to say is that understanding binary code is not an easy task, while looking for suspicious behavior is a bit of an easier task. The problem is that it really generates quite a lot of noise and alerts that you, well, frankly, don't want to work on. So I want to really present a new approach that can really help to get this strategy and get this sense of control and visibility in runtime more similar to what Gartner recommended, which is really taking the whitelisting approach, but making sure that you are familiar with any piece of code that is running in memory. And this approach is what I call code reuse analysis. Full disclosure, code reuse detection is an art that my company and I have been working the past 4 years to perfect, but there are other vendors who apply a similar concept to, mostly in other use cases, usually it's not cloud security, but for attribution and for threat intelligence, that they find it really, really effective. And the whole idea of this approach is, instead of looking for suspicious behaviors in order to identify malicious code, with code reuse analysis, you're trying to figure out what are the origins of every piece of software and who is the developer behind a certain piece of code. So for instance, imagine that you have a process running in your one of your EC2s, right? And you are able to say, hey, the author of this process, of this software, is IBM, right? Or the author is the Russian government, or the author is an in-house development team, right? So in the end, the idea is really to identify the origins of software based on detecting reused code. That's the whole idea of this approach. And what it can help you with is basically know the origin of all the binary code and all the programs that are running on your entire cloud infrastructure. So this technology can help you really to make sense of all the runtime code in memory that is happening at any given moment. So this is really the idea. And I wanted to show you how an empowered cloud workload protection platform would work with this technology in mind. So usually it would look something like this. Usually you will have some kind of an agent running in each of your hosts. Now, it doesn't mean that it needs to run in each of your containers, because the host itself can have a visibility towards the memory of all containers that are running inside that host. So like most cloud workload protection products, you would need some sort of like sensor to view what's running in your server. And that sensor would essentially monitor for any new program or software or even an injected code running in the memory. And once it detects a new software or a new code, it analyzes it with the code reuse analysis. So you'd be able really to identify the origins of every piece of code that is running across your system. And in addition to just identifying and protect you from, unauthorized and malicious code, since you are aware about the origins of the code in your entire infrastructure, you can have a very deep visibility towards knowing what exactly is running on your system. So this is how a cloud workload protection product will usually work while applying a code reuse analysis technology. A very granular monitoring of every piece of code in memory. That's really the idea, to gain that application control that Gartner has recommended, right? So you can think about it as really a combination of the old traditional whitelisting, but very granular and can operate in memory. So I know that this approach might be quite complicated because it is something new. However, I wanted to show you some visuals of how it might look like, how a CWCP solution would look like with code reuse analysis approach. So I'll just pull off my screen here just a second, please. Yes. So yet again, full disclosure, this is our own dashboard, but really I wanted to show you more of the approach and the idea of how it is like to know what are the origins of the entire code that is running in your infrastructure. So yet again, I won't show anything else just about but only the approach itself. So take a look on this section here, code distribution by verdict. What does that mean is that you can tell what are the origins of the code that is running in your system at any given moment. So for example, now I can know that 100% of the software in my cloud environment is from trusted origins and nothing that is unauthorized or malicious. Now, this type of visibility is very different from saying, hey, you have no suspicious activity going on, right? It's not that you don't know about a suspicious behavior or something like that, but you're sure that every single fragment of code is something that you know of and you trust. This is a very deep sense of control and visibility that this approach can provide you. Now, for example, if I'll take a look at what were the origins in the past 14 days, we can see that there was a small portion of code that was unknown and unauthorized that was running in my system. So yet again, this sense of control, knowing exactly what's happening, is something that I feel is very important. And showing you the idea of this approach, so really there are a ton of processes, programs, software running all the time in your system. But imagine that really you can have the visibility towards conducting a code reuse analysis on every single one of them. So just to give you an example, I see here a certain process called CERT colors, right? And seeing seeing that this really came from a trusted origin based on identifying the binary code we used within that process, yet again, is a very big, high confidence feeling to have. So I want to maybe summarize some of the advantages that you see on this approach. So I'll get back to my presentation just a sec. Yes. So Essentially, cloud workload protection platforms is the answer most likely to what you're looking for if you want to secure your cloud servers and runtime. However, adding to that code reuse analysis approach does have quite a lot of advantages on top of the regular cloud workload protection platform. And the first really advantage that I see is, yet again, the sense of visibility, the sense of control that you know what exactly is running in your cloud is a very, very big advantage of that because you're able to identify words as code, right? And secondly, think about it. If you have a solution that is operating in memory, that constantly analyzes binary code running in memory, it means that you're protected effectively from very, very sophisticated threats, including unknown vulnerabilities and fileless malware. Why is that? Because, yet again, they all translate to code that is running in memory. So because you're operating in memory, you can also detect very, very sophisticated attacks like those that I mentioned. And lastly, if you're taking this Gartner recommended approach of application control or knowing what's running in your servers, having this type of visibility, it helps your security team to focus on what's important. Because every single alert that will be produced from that kind of system will only correlate to an actual software or an actual program that is running in your servers. Not alerts like, hey, there's a suspicious machine here that connects to a suspicious IP, which can be very vague, right? But really high confidence alerts that can help you to focus on what's really important. So really to summarize our session today, I have just a few takeaways that I think you should consider. First is what we talked about before, the importance of runtime protection and the fact that researching cloud workload protection platforms can help you to achieve that goal. And lastly, really, any cloud workload protection platform that applies some kind of in-memory analysis or especially code reuse analysis techniques can really help you to not only have good protection, but also to spare your security team from quite a lot of noise. So this basically concludes our session today, and I'd be happy to take some questions if there are any. Please let me know.
All right, so just a reminder, folks, if you have questions for our presenter today, go ahead and put them in the Ask a Question tab that's at the bottom of your screen. We do have a handful that have already come in, so I'm going to go ahead and get things started. And the first question that I have here says, how does runtime protection help me deal with vulnerabilities?
Yeah, cool, very good question. So how runtime protection helps me to deal with vulnerabilities? Well, essentially, it all comes down to the slide that I showed before. Let me go back to that again. Well, essentially, any type of vulnerability, whether we're talking, in your Apache server or any kind of other, vulnerability known in the wild, in the end, when you exploit a vulnerability, you have to run code or inject code into memory as part of the exploitation process. So the vulnerability is only the hole, right? But if you monitor in runtime what is going through that hole, right, and actually running some suspicious activity or a bad payload in memory, that's what helps to really discover that. So I hope that makes sense.
All right. The next question that I have here says, these are some very good data points. So does this mean that you have to build up your footprint of code effectively, like an inventory, before you can then establish whether you can then classify the code as safe versus rogue? This could be done pre-deployment, So this potentially requires a strong handshake between change management and code reuse analysis tool. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, very interesting. So basically, any kind of whitelisting approach does have this disadvantage of constantly needing, like you said, to update what is the whitelist, what is the trusted software, which I completely agree. It is like an investment in most whitelisting approaches. However, specifically with the code reuse analysis approach, this quite it's quite removed this type of constant handshake, because most likely any kind of application that you want to introduce into the whitelist shares code or reuses code with another application that has already been introduced in the past. So just as a simple example, most software updates would look like 90% code that was reused and 10% maybe as unique or unknown code. And because of that, it helps really to make like this sort of like flexible whitelist and reduce the amount of work that you need to do pre-runtime to update the whitelist.
All right. So the next question that I have here says, how does a code reuse approach work with in-house development software?
Great. So actually, a very similar answer to what I just have said, because in-house development software is basically also something that you would want to whitelist, right? So that is why if you take a code reuse analysis approach, also the in-house software would essentially be updates of the same software again and again. The chances of a new software that doesn't share any code with any software, in-house or globally known software in the world, is very, very little. It's a very, very little chance. So that's why in-house development or any kind of like whitelisting scenarios work very well with code reuse detection. And maybe adding to that, making it a bit clearer. Most whitelisting approaches are working with hash-based type of analysis. If it's slightly different, then okay, it alerts you, hey, something is wrong. But yet again, if you take a code reuse or any kind of similarity approach, that helps you to be flexible enough to deal with any kind of changes that are happening, whether it's in-house software or externally developed software.
All right. So the last question that I have here says, is this code reuse analysis applicable to other environments outside of cloud, for example, in the OT environment?
Can you repeat which environment exactly?
They have some examples listed. For example, in the OT environment, AV is sometimes not applicable.
Yes. So I know that this is like a cloud security focused webinar. However, code reuse is an approach that you can take very generically to many different areas. Basically, everything that runs code can be also analyzed for code reuse and code similarities, right? What I would recommend, is, let me show you, well, our own solution that you can just try it out. You can basically upload any kind of file, whether it's taken from an OT environment, a regular IT, it doesn't really matter, as long as it's some kind of software. And in this, I will also take the opportunity to mention cloud workload protection platforms is something that I have recommended across the webinar. And we at Intezer, we have just released a few weeks ago to the market a new cloud workload protection platform that incorporates this whole code reuse analysis approach. So obviously, I would recommend you to CERT, but any kind of research that you do among this cloud workload protection platform is something that I highly recommend.
All right, wonderful. Well, it does look like that's all the questions that we have for this webinar. So I wanted to say thank you so much, Itai, for presenting, and also a huge thank you to Intezer for sponsoring today's webinar. We really appreciate all the time that it takes to put together these webinars and also all the great insight that you've provided today. If anyone has additional questions for Itai, please email the Cloud Security Alliance research team at research@cloudsecurityalliance.org, and we'll get you connected, or you can reach out to him with the contact information that he's provided on the screen there. Additionally, down below the presentation screen, you're going to find a tab where you can rate and review today's webinar. Please do so we know what you're enjoying and what we can improve upon. And finally, the recording of this webinar will be available within minutes of the conclusion. Just use the same link to rewatch. To view other recorded webinars from CSA or to sign up for new ones, you can go to cloudsecurityalliance.org/research/cloudbytes. Thank you, everyone, so much for attending today's webinar, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everybody.